Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's keynote seminar on what does the opening up of the retail market, retail competition, mean for the UK water industry. My name is Rob Wesley. I'm the Head of Policy at Water UK, and I'm joined on this panel by Andrew Beaver, Director of Strategy at Ofwat, Mark Powles, Chief Executive of Business Stream, Dr. Piers Clark, Commercial Director of Thames Water, and Philip Sweetman, Head of Utilities Consulting Europe for Tata Consulting Services. Now, as many of you may well know, there have been many attempts to introduce competition in water. It's a long history, and with the exception of in Scotland, limited impact to date. And those with long memories and long association with the sector might know that we could have had this discussion 10 years ago. But this time it really is different. With the Water Bill currently just about to become a Water Act, the sector is on the verge of a genuinely new era, with all businesses, public sector and charity customers in England due to have a choice of supplier, as their Scottish counterparts already do. The industry is working closely with regulators, government, customers and their representatives through the Open Water Programme to meet the government's target of opening up the market, of market launch, in April 2017. So this really is a good time to ask, what does the opening up of the retail market mean for the UK water industry? Our panel is well placed to provide a view. We have two members of the high-level group that DEFRA, the UK government department responsible for this policy, has established to get the plans for implementation up and running, and a competitor, a new entrant coming into the market, and a supplier to the new market. I'm going to ask each of our panel members to give a short presentation, and then we will have a panel discussion, and after some initial questions I'll invite questions from the floor. But to kick us off, can I invite Andrew for you to give us our first presentation.
Right, hello everybody. Very pleased to be here to talk to you today about this subject. For those of you who spend their time in the bubble of water, there is a hell of a lot going on at the moment. Obviously, there is a very important piece of legislation that's coming through, which is, as Rob says, trying to achieve what no other piece of legislation has managed to achieve before it. But we're also right in the middle of a very large price review process, which is extremely different to the previous price review processes that we have run. And those two things are supposed to be complementary and work with one another rather than working against one another. I've only got 5-10 minutes. I'm going to sort of set the scene about what the legislation is, what we think it will do for customers and companies, and then come on very briefly to how we're doing that. Obviously, we think the bill is a very good thing. We think it's very good for customers in terms of delivering real choice for the first time, in terms of helping customers to make savings, either financial savings or even savings on the volumes of water they're using, which is also beneficial for the environment. We think it also provides opportunities in the upstream area beyond the retail area that we're talking about today. Those need to be managed very carefully, but there's some really exciting opportunities there for entrants, for customers and for the environment too. And we think it helps. It will help with the economy. It will allow for more entry, new investment into the sector, and growth. But the fundamental message I think I kind of wanted to get across today was, it is a major change. It is a really, really big change for companies and customers. I'm not sure everyone really appreciates yet how big a change it's going to be. We're at the start of the process of that change, but fundamentally we have an industry here that has a lot to be pleased about, I think. It's been very successful at attracting investment at very low cost to customers. We've seen improvements in service, and we've seen bills lower, and we've seen lots of environmental improvements as well. So we need to build on that model, not sort of start again, as it were. So why choice? Why retail competition? Well, the first thing to say is that non-household customer preferences are very different to household customer preferences. And in the non-household sector, people have had choice over their utility providers in other utilities for a very long time now. And some of that customer base is very dismissive, understandably, about why they have had to deal with a sort of monopoly provision for that service. And I think one of the big advantages that we would hope to see from the introduction of choice is a real focus on service as much as anything else. There's a quote there from a policy exchange report from 2011, which talks about the potential savings that a single customer could make from simply consolidated billing, something which companies could do now, but something which after 20 years of privatisation, the industry just hasn't managed to do. And there have been various studies into that as well, and all of them show that there might be some reasonable benefits to be gained from this. I think it's very important to be clear from the start about what the scope of this market is going to be. We have a water supply licensing regime at the moment. That water supply licensing regime allows customers who are using more than 5 megalitres of water a year to switch in England, and those using more than 50 megalitres of water a year to switch in Wales, or rather in companies that are wholly or mainly located in Wales, which includes Welsh Water and Dee Valley. As we move forward, we will see the English market being opened up to all non-household customers by April 2017, and our focus is very much on that, the delivery of that date. We already have a market in Scotland which opened in 2008, as Rob said, and there has been some activity up there, and Mark is very familiar with that market. But we do have a very different policy position being taken from the Welsh Government to the UK Government, and it's important to reflect that. And that means that customers and sites in Wales will not be able to participate in this market in quite the same way. It will be very limited to those very small number of very large customers who are using more than 50 megalitres of water. So what does it mean for customers? Well, as I've already said, we think there's some real opportunities here in terms of better service, price, more demand side water efficiency type activity, which we think would be really positive. And there's several examples of that from Scotland, which I won't steal Mark's thunder on. But I think there's also an important point about consumer protection. This is a market for household customers. We will continue to have them. They will continue to have a monopoly service, and we need to continue to protect those customers in price and service terms through regulation, through price controls. And we need to make sure that the opening up of the market doesn't result in disruption for those household customers. And we need to think very carefully, and at the moment the work is very much focused on the architecture that we need to make the market work, but we will absolutely need to come on to what protections we need for smaller non-household customers, small businesses, building on the experience that we have from the energy sector. And in that context, the default tariffs that we're introducing through the price control are really a key part of that, early part of that package, in terms of offering a backstop level of price and service to all non-household customers. So what does it mean for companies? Well, it means a hell of a lot for companies, and we've got a couple of them on the panel, so I will let them talk about it. But from Ofwat's perspective, from the regulator's perspective, I think there's two really critical things that I wanted to highlight. The first is that we need a level playing field here. Okay, we have a large number of monopoly companies, regional monopoly companies that are vertically integrated, that have a lot of what pointy-headed economists would call market power, and we need to make sure that entrants can join this market and compete on level terms, that there isn't they don't get wound up in red tape and legal action when they're trying to deal with wholesale companies, that they have a very clear and fair wholesale charging boundary, and they know what they have to pay for those services, and they know what sorts of margins they can expect to make if they provide those services better than the incumbents. And that rivalry is really important for customers, because the more effective that rivalry is, the more effective the market will be at providing those benefits that I talked about. The second thing I'd say is market governance. Market governance is a really, really critical part of making this market work effectively. All the market participants will have to sign up to a set of rules about how they want to participate in this market, which avoids some of the problems I've talked about briefly previously in terms of getting wound up in red tape and legal issues. And I suspect that will be quite a different thing for the sector. I'm not sure that there's a lot of experience of doing that, and I think that will be quite a difficult thing for some of the people in the sector to get their heads around, but that is also a very fundamental part of what we need to do. And those two things, level playing field and market governance, are very much where our head is focused at the moment as a regulator. It's been said already that we've been here before 10 years ago, and there is a huge amount of, well, I take that there's a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm amongst everybody that's involved in this, be those incumbents, be those entrants, be those government, be those regulators, to make sure that we make this work and make a success of this for customers. And Open Water and the Open Water Markets Limited entity that's recently been set up is absolutely at the heart of that. They are trying to work in a very collaborative way that tries to put customers at the heart of the design process to make sure that we end up with a market that is designed for customers. And in that context, I would really encourage people to get involved in that process and have a say about how the market is designed. And there have been various consultations going out and other events, and I know that they're very keen to hear from people, so I would very much encourage people to do that. So just in summary, returning to my original question, what does it mean for customers? We think that there's some real opportunities here. We think that there's an opportunity for improvements in service, for efficiencies, for some price gains, and for helping on the water efficiency side as well, as we've seen in Scotland. But we also need to maintain some level of consumer protection, particularly for smaller business customers and to protect household customers. And what does it mean for companies? Those two major things that I talked about, level playing field and market governance. And so I think, you know, this is a major change. We do have to get it right, especially given the previous history. We've got to deliver this successfully, but we have to still protect the fundamentals of what has made this sector the envy of the world and replicated all over the place as far as possible. So I think that's kind of my central message. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for kicking us off. Now, our next speaker, Mark Powles, Chief Executive of Business Stream, the largest supplier in the competitive market in Scotland.
Thanks very much. I'm not going to do loads of PowerPoint slides. I'm going to try and keep this nice and simple. A little bit of audience participation before we start. How many customers are there in this room? People who buy services from water companies? Okay, a few. I worry about you guys. I have done for the last 7 years since I first came into the industry, because nobody talked much about customers. They talked about investors, they talked about infrastructure and building assets and pouring concrete in the ground, but they didn't really talk about doing the things that you needed them to do to help you to reduce your consumption, to get a better deal. And what we've had in Scotland in the last 7 years, or the last 6 years, is a competitive market. I think, as Andrew said, it's been widely recognised that as a market, it's worked. I can only speak for my own customers, and we've saved somewhere in the region of £70 million for our customers since the market opened. We've brought 60 new innovative service propositions to the market that help customers to understand when, why, and how they use water and to treat waste more effectively. We've taken about 16 billion litres of water out of use. That's carbon reduction, That's money that customers aren't spending on water bills that they can spend on their own core business. And that's had a massive change. I mean, as customers, you only really worry about the things that you can influence. And competition gives you the opportunity to be in control, to pick the services that you want for your business. Every business is different. If you're a food manufacturer, your needs are very different from a multi-site retailer. If you're a council, you're dealing with lots of sites. You want things like consolidated billing that'll take the hassle out of service. You want to either save money, save time, reduce risk, or save the planet, reduce your environmental responsibility. And I think it's really important that we need to start talking about your needs. And I suppose 7 years, we've been doing a lot of listening, and we've developed service propositions that you need. Now, we're not unique in this. We looked around the industry when we started. We listened to you, we talked to you, and you had the opportunity to choose what was right for your business. Now, the water bill is going through, hopefully get royal assent, I would hope, sometime in early May. And then there's 3 years. 3 years, that's a long time. You can change a planet in 3 years. There's a lot of time to get this market open. There's about 1.1 million customer sites in England. There's potentially 22 wholesalers, up to 40 retailers, all fighting for those 1.1 million customers. It's going to be complicated, and so we need that time. As Andrew said, we've got the high-level group, we've got the open water markets that in effect will create the market operator. But this mustn't become an intellectual project, because if it becomes like that, it'll become costly and complicated. And all that will do is squeeze all the value out of the market. That means there'll be less benefit to share with you as customers. So the market needs to be simple, transparent. It needs to be fair. Andrew's talked about a level playing field. One of the great things in Scotland was, as the incumbent operator in Scotland, we had to physically separate from our parent company. We couldn't be seen to be getting an unfair advantage by being attached to our parent company. That's created a market that new entrants can come into and can compete with us on that level playing field. It worries me that there is nothing in the bill that really creates a level playing field, and the baton is now really being handed to Ofwat to put in place those mechanics that will give new entrants confidence that they can compete on a level playing field. And why is that important? If this market, and I use the phrase, stitched up for incumbents, then there will be no market. There is a market today in England. There are 27,000 sites that can all choose their water provider. But you have to use more than 5 megalitres of water. It has to be on a single site. It doesn't include sewage services. And the gross margins that are available to retailers are approximately 1%. Guess what? Very few customers have switched. We need to make sure that the market is designed to benefit you. Clearly, all of us as operators, whether you're defending your own patch or you want to acquire customers in this new market, we all want to make money. We all got shareholders and we need to make a return. But if we don't demonstrate value to you and you don't have confidence that you can go to market and create a provider that will demonstrate value to you, then we all lose. So it's all about customers. That would be my message to take away from today. You know your business better than any of us. We can help you, hopefully, to save money, to save time, to be more in control, and meet your environmental credentials. But it'll only happen if you start voicing your concerns and engage in the programme. It's not just about operators and incumbents, it's about you as customers. So please get engaged. If you want to have a conversation offline, we'd be happy to do that and come along to the stand. But thank you very much.
Next speaker, Dr. Piers Clark, Commercial Director of Thames Water, another competitor in the new market.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm the Commercial Director for Thames Water. Thames Water is the utility that serves London and the surrounding regions. Arguably thought of as the biggest water company in England and Wales, although I think that's only in terms of the number of customers we serve rather than the geography. The exam question for addressing today is, what does the opening up of retail competition mean for the UK water industry? And you know what? I'd agree 100% with everything that my esteemed colleagues have already said today. This is all about customers. It's all about how can we make the industry more competitive, more focused on what our end users want. And that's a dramatic change for the water industry. And what I want to do is just tease out a few of the things which I think are phenomenal changes for this sector. It's worth remembering that the water sector was competitive. 120 years ago, it was all competitive. If you were in London in the 1880s, 1890s, you would have had to choose your supplier. You could have flipped a supplier. There was all sorts of nefarious practices going on, people banging holes in other people's pipes to try and upset the practice. And it was only in 1898 that the industry was privatised because there was a terrible drought and London started running out of water. So here we are, 120 years later, putting competition back into the water sector. And this image, it's been touched on a couple of times already, of a sumo wrestler against a little baby. As it happens, I'm both a baby and a sumo wrestler. With my Thames Water hat on, I'm the incumbent in London. I've got 200,000 business customers that I'm responsible for, a £400 million business. And I'm the big fat incumbent, just as, I have to say, Mark is in Scotland. But Mark, like me, is also, at other times, the little boy, the new entrant. So in Scotland, I'm the new entrant, and in London, Mark's the new entrant for me. And actually, we have to be alive to that. We have to adopt different behaviours. You know what? It's great to be a big incumbent because we've got the history, we've got the expertise, we've got the know-how. But we've also got with that practices which might slow us down if we don't open our minds appropriately to it. There's going to be a lot of companies who are new to this, who are just the little fellas coming in, and they will be probably faster at doing things. They will probably more fleet of foot than a machine, a bigger company, be that Severn Trent or Anglian or Scottish Water, sorry, Business Stream or Thames. They will behave in a different way, and we've got to be ready for that. That's a dramatic change to the industry. Second thing is, this is actually quite risky. 110 years ago, the first flight happened. It went just over 100 feet. Now you can fly around the world. Those first tentative steps that were done by the Wright brothers that then led to the dramatic change that has happened, that's the point that we're at in this industry. If we get these first tentative steps wrong, if the market codes don't quite work right, then you know what? This flight's never going to take off. We're never going to do anything more than stutter along. And actually, it's in all of our interests, be those the customers or the users or the wholesalers or the retailers, whether they're new incumbents, new entrants or incumbents. We've all got to be mindful about how risky this is going to be and how we need to put our heads together to de-risk it. And that's where Andrew's plea to get involved with open water, I think, particularly resonant, because actually that's the way that we can make sure we get market codes that work. So here's a terrific picture. It's from 1953, I think it was, at the front line in the Korean War. And those of you who can't see it, there's a frontline soldier cradling a kitten. And the kitten had been made homeless from its mother had been killed in the battlefield, I think. And the point of this is that we've got to have soldiers who are on the front line, and they've got to be sensitive to the needs of the customers that are out there. So the first thing is soldiers on the front line. That's a new thing for the water industry. We don't have salespeople knocking on the door, selling people water. That's just not what we do. And we've got to create this army of people who are going to be on the front line, having conversations that they didn't have before. And yet they've got to be sensitive to the needs of the customers, to the needs of different sectors. A hospital needs to be treated totally differently to a brewery. They've both got water is vital to their day-to-day business, but clearly they've got different needs that are relevant. This is the Fosby flop. The first time this was done, everyone else who was doing high jump the usual way, with a sort of straddle jump and throwing their legs over it, they all cried foul. They said, oh, you can't do that, you're breaking the rules. And when he said, no, I'm going to carry on doing it. they said, no, well, it's not fair. But he went, well, I've broken all the rules. So what everyone did was they copied it. And actually, we've got to have that same degree of daring and innovation in the water sector. Because the only way we're going to engage with customers is coming up with propositions that are more engaging than what they've already seen. And you know what? Everyone will start copying and they'll do other things. And you've got to constantly be striving to reach a little bit further, reach a little bit higher, do something a bit more different than you were doing last time. Because that's the only way the water market is going to come alive. Daring to be different. There's only 2 more of these, by the way, those who are tiring of my pulling up old images. This one's taken from the Second World War. A picture of a milkman walking across the blitzed London. Truth of the matter actually is that this was a staged photograph. The milkman wasn't really a milkman, he was the photographer's assistant. But the photographer saw this image and wanted to capture something that was then used to enormous benefit in the campaign about resilience of London. Because it shows whilst everything's going on around you, we're going to carry on delivering. And that's a point about the water industry, is we can't get this wrong. We can't afford to let the fact that, the market codes might not be quite right, or we might not have the right IT systems. See, Philip, I'm just lining this up for you when you come on. We might not have the right IT systems in place. We can't let that stop us from supplying water to our customers. And whether we're a wholesaler or a retailer, we've got to keep that at the forefront of our minds. You can't let a hospital suddenly stop having its water supply because there's a bit of a battle going on. We've got to keep calm, we've got to be resilient, and we've got to be that little bit audacious in terms of finding our way through that storm, which leads me to my last picture. There's a storm coming, and it's a storm for everyone. It's a storm for the regulator, because they've got to get these codes in place. It's a storm for the wholesalers. You might think the wholesalers can sit back and go, hey, it doesn't matter. I'm still supplying water. I don't care whether I've got 40, 50, 10, however many retailers. I'm just supplying them. Well, actually, no. They've got to get their systems up to date to be able to interface with different retailers. And what happens when one retailer changes? The retailers have got to be alive to this. But you know what? I think most of the retailers are. I think all of us are out there working out what it is that we need to be offering our customers. The customers are going to have all sorts of confusion. They're going to be approached by lots of different retailers. They're going to be told different stories. There'll be confusion and mistruths and all those sorts of things coming out. And we as an industry have actually got to provide, in particular, our customers with shelter from the storm, but also we've got to help our colleagues and our shareholders, no doubt, who are going to look at what's happening in the water market, and it's going to spook them a bit. So the question was, what does the opening up of retail mean for the water industry? Well, it's a time of change. And a time of change is a time of opportunity, and it should be very, very exciting. Thank you very much.
And our final perspective is from Philip Sweetman, Head of Utilities Consulting Europe from Tata Consultancy Services, to provide a perspective from somebody with great knowledge of the sector, but from outside of it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Piers. I'm going to take a game of 2 halves sort of here, because the first thing I'm going to have a quick dip into is a survey that we did with Utility Week, which looked at what the industry actually thought of some of these changes, and I'm just going to bring out a few highlights from that. And then, as Rob said, I'm going to move on to look at some of the probably more systems views of the changes and the things that have to change in that area. So let's look at the market stuff first. We did a survey with Utility Week, as I said, probably just before Christmas, and I know things are moving fast, so things have probably changed a bit since then. And we went out to all the water companies with a survey that covered, I think, 26 questions, and we had the majority give the information back. The 26 questions covered quite a wide range of pieces, starting from the policy side, policy framework, and the guidance that's been given, looking at the options that were out there in the bill, and then picking up on specific areas that we know that's going to change. Things like the billing, CRM, what was going to happen to metering, field operations, how was that going to change, and staffing, how were things going to be reorganised to actually meet the new pieces. So we asked people's opinions on this. The summary findings are quite interesting. I think it's fairly obvious that there's sort of two things that were the sort of the biggest consensus on this one. First one was, I think there was varying confidence levels, but about sort of 20% I think said that they were absolutely not clear what they were going to do, and that the policy wasn't there yet. Now we've heard from Open Water and Ofwat, and part of that marches on, so I suspect if we did it again that might be changing because the situation is clarifying. But nonetheless, it's not 100% clear yet, we know this. And that also goes to the specific functionality, and I come back to talk about the market operator and how one starts to sort of interface to that, and that's part of that picture. The other area of consensus, I think, sort of twofold. One is that I think, given the Scottish antecedents, I think the view is that there will be an active market, particularly in the big organisations, less so in the small and medium-sized enterprises, but the big companies are likely to be looking for the sort of advantages that we've heard tell originally. Interestingly, on the survey, something like 78% of respondents would actually like the option to withdraw from the retail market, which I think is an interesting one, considering we're all looking for this big change and give benefits for the clients. That sort of speaks slightly against it at this stage. And I think when we asked about priorities within the companies about what they were going to do, I think the first and most obvious priority was to make sure, we've heard the customer word, it's a nasty word before, and it's now sort of changing to become the focus of all these pieces. And I think looking after one's existing companies and the local brands is prime target for most water companies. And I think secondary sort of to that is then going out and acquiring new brands, and it depends on the company as to quite sort of where you sit on that strategy side. But that's the way it came out in the survey. I think there was also fairly clear acknowledgement that sitting at the heart of this billing and CRM, both the service that's offered and the systems underneath it will need some investment, will need to change. We're doing things differently. We're doing things we never did before as an industry. That is not something that the current companies do particularly well. And undoubtedly, when the customers are paying, they'll want more services, more value-add services, as we talked about. So those will need to change. I think it's also fairly clear that within the metering area, while there's a strong programme of putting them in the ground, again, it sort of depends on the PR14 and what's put forward sort of in there, but there will be some changes in metering, sort of how, again, to make use of all that data to do better things, more real-time potentially, to entice clients to come and do business with you. And I think that's an underestimated area at the moment. And I think the last piece I was talking about was the staffing, how companies are thinking about reorganising. And I think most are focusing at this stage on retraining internal staff, on trying to work out what they've got to do and move towards it, as opposed to going out and looking for additional services. And I think maybe that's partially due to the fact that there's some uncertainty, and partially due to the fact that I think the main piece here is looking after your customers and starting to get to know them effectively, which you can do regardless of technology. That's just back to old-fashioned sales, I guess, in those terms, and customer care. And clearly across all the organisations there's going to be a fair amount of change and challenge in taking one's own staff with you and making sure that they understand the new way of working, and the whole thing is seamless. We also sort of asked within that, sort of, if you took your top 3 areas that were going to be impacted, what would they be? And this was the result, which, I mean, I guess on the face of it, I could see that the first 3, billing, fairly self-evident, as we've talked about. Call centres, again, sort of at the heart of things. And then account management, which to most people is going to be a new discipline of looking after those big customers more effectively. So I can see those as being sort of a perfectly reasonable top 3. I guess the other sort of couple of things that I would pull out of this, just as a flavour, is I think CRM and marketing are fairly low down that list. For me, given that you're setting up a retail business and understanding your customers and what you're doing with them, how you're talking to them, and how you're understanding what they need and trying to deliver it is fairly sort of heart and soul of most retail organisations. And that's not very high up the list at the moment. And maybe that will change, but that's slightly odd. I think the other thing that is not on here, and I think it's already been sort of mentioned, is the sheer amount of effort that is likely to have to be in the wholesale part of the business to actually ensure that it is also doing business as usual. It's not as it is now. That has to change. It can't be sort of underestimated, and that doesn't even figure at all at the moment in most people's plans. So just a flavour. That report, I believe that everyone's going to get a copy emailed out. That's sitting here, that's been scanned on the way in. We tried to get paper copies, but you'll get the electronic copy. It does make quite interesting reading. So moving on to the second half, I'm going to have a quick look through sort of what the market might look like and some of the systems aspects of it, which hopefully complements what the other panellists have said. I think this picture is fairly self-evident. You know, we're going to end up with a market that looks something like the Ofwat will sit at the top as the regulator, doing what it does now. No particular change in that. We have got the wholesale side delivering water. We've got the retail, which is the new element, sitting with the contestable customers, and we've got this central market authority sitting in the middle of it. And we've got an element underneath which I've sort of pulled out, and this is back to levelling our playing fields effectively here, and making sure that one understands the costs and one can attribute them to the right part of the business, such that you're not subsidising one business from the other one. And the Scottish market got around that by separating completely. English market a little bit more difficult, but something like this is going to have to be in place. I think that's been sort of backed up, and I'm just going to flash through this one by the papers that Open Water are putting out. The big thing to take out of here is really the interface between the wholesale, retail and the market operators, which at the moment is either going to be web forms at its simplest if you've got a very small number of companies, or a totally integrated automated system at the top end of it, which is a lot of investment, but would be okay if you've got the customer volume to support it. And I think just I'm going to finish on this side, just looking at some of those pieces. Some of them we've picked up from a business perspective, but they're definitely IT issues as well, support issues. First one is how we interface with that market. That automated system, you know, they aren't out there at the moment. It isn't defined at the moment. There's a lot of change in that. Understanding costs across most water companies, not really done at a very granular level. It really needs to be on both sides of the business to understand which levers to pull as a business, and where you're going to make your money, and which customers you should be dealing with. Clearly there's complexity across England, Scotland, Wales. They're all different. Dealing with customers that have sites in all of them is going to be an interesting piece. We've already talked about the customer front and centre. New billing, we talked about consolidated. That has to be there rather than paper and string solutions. Debt management becomes more critical for the retail arm, because that's where a lot of the risk lies under the model. CRM, understanding your customer again, understanding what's happening out there, being able to tell the customer of it in terms of incident management and so on. And being able to do that across multiple digital platforms, I think, is the way that the world goes now, and what the customers, business and domestic, effectively will end up with. Underlying it, you've got the internal processes which will need to change for it, and I think there's a massive part of that which is the data side of it. The data will explode as the meters get into the ground. Understanding the customers needs data. Typically that's not very clean, not very consistent, and very compartmentalised. There's a huge effort in getting that right, and I know one of the biggest pieces on the sort of bottom line of the Scottish market was getting that data right in the first place, and then sort of keeping it clean. It's something that's underestimated, I think, in the UK market. And I think final point is clearly we have to do all of that change on a pretty small margin, sort of in terms of what's out there in the retail. So getting your strategy right and the economies of scale, I think, are critical. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. We now have about 20 minutes for discussion. I'm going to kick us off with a quick reality check to reassure any cynics that are out there who might think they've heard this all before. I started off by saying this time it really is different. Andrew, was I right to be that confident?
Don't think it's, oh, it's on. Yeah, so I think so. I think that, as I said at the beginning, there is a really palpable, I think, desire amongst all market participants and the other stakeholders who are involved in this to really move this forward. I am not ignorant of the size of the task involved. I think that there's kind of two ways of looking at this. One is a sort of big bang approach to this, which is everything must be absolutely right and absolutely ready for April 2017. And I'm absolutely certain that that won't be the case, because even if you look at the Scottish market and other places, data is still being cleaned up several years on, and so it's not right to think about this in the context of everything is perfect and then it all gets delivered. I think that what we have is a market at the moment, and over the course of time between now and April 2017, some of the barriers that are stopping activity in that market will fall away. I hope some of them will start to fall away more quickly, and that will start to drive the kind of activity that will force some of the things that Piers was talking about externally, as well as the drive that I know lots of people are doing internally. So I think it's really a case of how painful is the birth. So if I think we absolutely need to make progress in certain areas, and I think we have the time and resources to do that. There is a lot of work to do. We want to make the birth as painless as possible.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, if I could turn to you. With the same premise, is this time really different? But moving it on a bit, April 17 is the target date that's been set. A phrase I've often heard in relation to that date is challenging but doable. How confident would you feel about April 2017? Are we really going to see the birth of a new era, in England at least?
Well, if I was a customer, I'd probably question why it's not going to be sooner. 3 years is an awful long time. And we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper this time. Scotland was the first to do it in water, but it benefited from picking the best bits out of energy and ignoring the worst bits. It looked at the telecoms market, and the market opened on time, within budget, and has paid back on its business case more than was anticipated. And I think the engagement now between the regulator in Scotland and the regulator in England is good, and there's a good dialogue that's learning from some of those things. There is engagement across the industry, some better than others. There are some that are still in denial, I have to say, but the bigger players are now actively engaging. There's been a lot of work that's been done over the last 12 months by Open Water in terms of creating an initial blueprint, looking at what the procurement strategy needs to be for systems and processes, and building on the work that was done in Scotland. So challenging, yes, because these things are always challenging. Doable, most definitely. And music to my ears is that some of the barriers that prevent activity now could fall away before that. And that's something I've been calling for some time. Why can't we get data on eligible customers that above 5 megalitre today? All it needs is for incumbents to provide that data in the same way as it's provided through a market system in Scotland. Avoidable costs is a dreadful way of establishing what the margin should be for a retailer to share with customers. Hopefully during the determination process, that might change in the next 12 months and more margin will become available. And let's not hide from it. If there's no margin available, no suppliers are going to want to get interested, no customers are going to want to switch. That hopefully might change in the next 12 months or so. And ultimately, I think you guys have got to keep banging the drum and demanding more, quicker, faster, so that you can start to get those benefits. So to answer your question, challenging but very doable.
Piers, with your dual aspect of an incumbent and a competitor, how do you see the world?
Thanks. Well, it's a fascinating challenge, this, because the argument was that there's going to be winners and losers, and let's just spend a minute thinking about who those winners and losers are going to be, because the guaranteed winners in this are the customers. Guaranteed. Because you know what? They're going to go from having had a monopoly supplier to having suppliers who are fighting over themselves to deliver them a better service at a lower price. Guaranteed winners. Marvellous. If you're a business customer, you should enjoy the next couple of years. For the retailers, it's a bit of a ups and downs here. They're only going to win if they adopt the very attitudes that Mark and myself and actually all of us have talked about up here. They've got to be innovative, they've got to be fleet of foot, they've got to be fighting on a level playing field, and actually only the fittest are going to survive, and actually those customers get to choose. It doesn't matter what we say up here, they're going to decide whether the customer's going to decide which one of us succeeds, and some of us will succeed in the long run, and some of us will succeed in the short run. We'll create a little business and then they'll get bought up. There'll probably be consolidation. It'll probably go a bit like it has in the energy industry. When the energy industry opened up, there were lots of small retailers, and then fairly quickly it consolidated down to the 6 that we've got now. Best not to dwell too much on the current debates around energy companies and retail, because we won't go down that route, I'm sure. The wholesalers have got to work out whether they are in this as winners or losers. And you know what? The big question there is going to be the shareholders in the wholesale businesses. Because if you right now owned a water company in, I don't know, say Southwest Water, if you were a shareholder of Southwest Water, which is as many of you will be aware, it's a floated company, it's a PLC, so maybe there are people in the room who've got shares in Southwest Water. It's a very real problem for them now as to if the prices to the customers aren't going to go up, and there's now this competitive market where you can lose customers, there is a real risk that they're going to lose value if Southwest Water isn't able to embrace the whole retail story. There's going to be this issue around how does this industry work? And some shareholders will decide to exit. Some will decide to specialise, I suspect. You'll see them actually opting to choose to go for a wholesale business rather than a retail business. They'll choose to want to invest in infrastructure and the risks associated with long-term infrastructure rather than the risks associated with being active in a retail environment. So we've got this very exciting but very dynamic position coming with only one group of guaranteed winners, which is actually the business customers, which is you guys. So is it going to come? Can we make it in the timeframes? Yeah, absolutely. We've got, it won't be perfect, and I've been on record saying that actually if in an ideal world I personally would have pushed it back a few months because I would have preferred there to be a bit more time to get it more right. But hey, you know, it's coming, we're ready for it, we've got to gear up. Will the whole of the industry be ready for it? Well, as Mark said, there are some people who have been a bit in denial, and they're going to have to wake up pretty damn quickly.
To bring you into this debate, Philip, some people are a bit in denial. How does that, is that a message that you picked up in the independent research that you carried out last year?
I think there's certainly elements of it, and you can see it from that brief chart that I sort of put up when you looked at people's priorities. I think the priorities, if you were thinking about setting up a business that was really going to go out and compete, would be different than we just showed there. That most people's initial reaction is, what's the minimum we can get away with, if you like, while we understand what the market is going to do, and then we sort of understand what we've got to do to play. And if you look at the technology side of it, it's probably not a constraint, certainly not in the first couple of years, given the number of customers. You can do what you want with what you've got pretty well with some tweaks. It doesn't require massive investment. So that then looks at a sort of gentler strategy that says we'll put our toe in We'll see if that works, and we'll see what the margins are, most particularly whether we'll make a decision to go wholeheartedly in. At that stage, you start talking about service and innovation and investment, therefore, in the systems to make those more real and to do more things for customers. But you don't need to do that sort of initially. So I think the denial is in that they're taking a step back and thinking, we'll wait a little bit before we go wholeheartedly after everything.
Thank you, Philip. Now I'm going to invite questions from the floor, and there are a couple of people around with mics. And when you ask a question, if I can ask if you can give your name and who you're representing, and I might perhaps group questions, ask for 2 or 3 questions to come forward that we can ask the panel together. So if I could ask for a first question.
Hi, my name's Sam Mossard. I'm here from Affinity Water. With retail exit back on the agenda and the current small margins, is there a danger that when the market opens in 2017, that we'll have the equivalent of the big 6 in the energy market at that stage? And it's open to anyone.
Can I have a crack at that? I think that would be dangerous if that happened. Experience in Scotland is there are now, I think, 14 competitors in the Scottish market, and almost every month somebody else applies for the licence, and that's pretty much half water companies from England, ourselves, but quite a lot of new entrants as well. And I suppose as the incumbent with the dominant market share, I'm feeling the heat from those new entrants as much, if not more, than I am from established water companies. So I think this is a really interesting market. I think if we get to a big 6 and nothing else, that would be wrong. You need new entrants to keep you honest. You know, I suffer from fear and paranoia about new entrants coming in and doing something I haven't thought of. And ultimately, that's what you want. You want lots of innovation, lots of people like me with fear and paranoia, always trying to bring something new to the market for you. And I think the model that's going to be set in England will encourage new entrants. And I think that'll create quite a vibrant market. But let's face it, we do need some consolidation. You know, 22 incumbents, potentially 18 to 20 new entrants, all fighting for 1 million customers. Well, do the sums, it doesn't add up. There just won't be enough benefit around. So I think that's too many, but a big 6 would be wrong as well.
I'd be in agreement. I think it's going to be very difficult to regulate against there being consolidation. It is inevitable that there will be, as the market matures, the winners will be identified, and who knows, some of the big 6 in energy might decide that they want to do a multi-utility play, and they will come in and they'll consolidate. Or maybe some of the big retailers in water that get creative will decide they want to move into energy, and they'll consolidate the energy companies. I wholeheartedly agree with the statement that the thing that keeps us paranoid and on our toes will be new entrants coming in, and if Andrew can do anything to ensure that the market is kept alive so that new entrants can keep finding their way to come in and be that grit in the oyster that makes the incumbents have to ensure a good deal, then that would be a good piece of regulation.
I was just reflecting the previous debate in this forum was on the energy sector and some of the challenges facing the energy sector at the moment. If I can take the liberty as chair of posing a question to Andrew of how can we avoid some of the difficulties in terms of legitimacy that the energy sector has faced as we embark on this journey of liberalising the water sector. There are clearly great benefits to be achieved by liberalising the market, but any observer of the energy market would see that there are potential risks at the same time.
Working now? Sorry. So I think it's a simple answer. It's learning the lessons from what we have seen in energy. You know, I don't necessarily think 6 is the wrong number. I think searching around for the right number is actually probably the wrong thing to do. Certainly I agree with the points made about there must be scope for consolidation. I suspect actually there has been scope for consolidation in retail for the past 2+ decades, but because we had regional vertically integrated licenses, it's not been possible. And whereas you might discuss the merger of one large network with another business and say that doesn't make a whole heap of sense, we've probably got we're creating a monster here. Having some of the retail operations that we've got is actually a bit ridiculous from an efficiency point of view. So there must be some benefits from consolidation. I think the key thing I'd say about the relationship with energy is, number one, we're not talking about household customers here. So many of the issues that we've seen about low levels of switching, mis-selling, doorstep selling, unfair contracts, etc., I don't think we will expect to see that in quite the same way. That doesn't mean, as I said in my presentation, we don't need some protection for small business customers. We absolutely do, and they are, as a group, very alive to that themselves and are requesting that. And I think, you know, some of the points that we've picked up from Scotland in terms of the introduction of a default tariff and making sure that there's a backstop level of protection, that there is a regulated price and service offering available to customers, helps us to deal with those people that, for whatever reason, aren't kind of active participants and switchers in the market. So I think you know, put simply, the fact that we're going last means we have the opportunity to learn from everybody that's gone before us, effectively.
Thank you, Andrew. Next questions. In the corner.
Thank you, Barry Clark. I hear the noises about protection for small business, but is there any way really here that big businesses aren't going to have significant advantages at the expense of small ones? Won't it be a big biz stitch-up on both sides?
Who would like first go at that question? The regulator.
Okay. So it is, I'm sure, true that the most margin to be gained initially is in amongst the biggest customers. And so I have no doubt that people will look to switch the biggest customers first. I'm sure Mark is trying to do that as we speak down here. Maybe Piers is trying to do that up in Scotland. What happens after they switch is that margin is not there anymore. And so they have to look at the next customer and the next customer. You get into lots of conversations about cherry picking, which is the wrong way of thinking about it. That's just how markets work. And over time, you will get more competition happening amongst the small customers. And indeed, you know, in Scotland, there are some providers in that market that aren't interested in the big customers. They are genuinely just looking for the smaller customers. So I think, you know, partly it's about who enters the market and what they want to do. Partly the bigger providers will certainly start with the bigger customers, but that's what happens, and they move down the chain. So yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you. It will start with the bigger customers, but I think, you know, it will have to trickle down from that.
Mark.
All I'd say is the experience in Scotland is that it started off with people trying to cherry pick large customers, and I think we were fairly good at defending that. A lot of the new entrants that have come in are targeting smaller customers, and I think I'm right in saying we've lost more small customers than we have large customers. So it's active across all sectors, all shapes, all sizes of customers, and all geographic areas as well. So I can only say the experience from Scotland is that I think small customers can benefit as much, if not more, than small customers.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions.
Hiya, Kerry Daly from Balfour Beatty. I was just wondering, the survey results showed that a lot of the water companies wanted to stay with their own existing clients. So although it starts in 2017, how quickly do you think we'll actually see these massive changes?
Okay. Sorry, just I'm not sure everyone heard the question, but I think what you asked was that water companies, the survey had shown that water companies wanted to stay with their customer base.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure every water company wants to retain their customer base, assuming that they want to stay in retail. The challenge is that they won't necessarily have that choice. there will be competition and people will... So, Mark, I'm sure, wants to retain every customer in Scotland, but he's got lots of annoying people like me coming along and trying to talk them away off him. In the same way, in Thames Water, we will have exactly that. We'll have people coming and talking to our customers and making propositions which, if they're more compelling and more attractive than the propositions that we make as an incumbent to them, those customers will choose to switch. But of course, we want them all to go to Anglian Water first. So if there's anyone in here, can you go to the Anglian Water region first? Let's all just focus there. Is that a good plan?
Time for one more last question, I think.
There's one at the front.
Erin Matthews from Thames Water Commercial Services. My question's about, so we've been talking about how it's becoming to England in 2017 and all the challenges and opportunities that there have been in Scotland. But what would you say is the biggest lesson to make sure that customers have the best possible experience when these changes do come in? And how can retailers help that be the case, that customers benefit most?
We'll give Mark the first crack at that one.
I think it's quite easy. Choose business stream. I think it will be different. I think Scotland was an unknown. It was a first. People sat on the sidelines. In many cases, there was a lot of lobbying to stop competition going anywhere else. But once the market kicked in, then customers of all shapes and sizes are benefiting. I think the other thing is, for those of you that are sad enough to read the market blueprint that runs to about 120 pages, the market will be open for pre-registration in October 2016. So I would say to you as customers, start thinking about this now. First thing is make sure you've got your data in shape. Make sure you know that when you go to market, that you're doing it with a good set of data and you know what you want out of the procurement exercise. What we need to do as an industry is to make sure that the mechanics of the market work. And as a retailer, what I need more than anything else is for the incumbents to be good wholesalers. Because it doesn't matter how good you are as a retailer, if the wholesaler cannot handle that relationship, deal with the transactions in a timely way, then you customers won't benefit. But I think there's a lot of work that you guys can do now to start preparing yourself for when the market opens. And bear in mind, there is a market that's open today. The margins are slim, but the added value services to reduce your overall consumption are fairly significant. So understand what your drivers are, understand what you want out of procurement, and prepare for it so that you're ready to go to market as soon as possible.
In my efforts to keep the peace between the two competitors either side of me, it's only fair that I give Piers a last word on this.
Thanks, Rob. So the question was, what's the most important lesson we could learn? Well, I think the most important lesson for the retailers is it's about listening to a customer. This is not an asset-centric business anymore. It's a customer-led business. And you know what, all this stuff about data cleaning and market codes and stuff, that's for the industry to worry about, and we've got to get it right. We need to start listening to customers and responding to what their needs are, because you can't expect customers to know and understand the market operation codes. We need to understand that for them and deliver that service to the customers so they don't have to worry about it.
Thank you, Piers. And just before I draw us to a close, just a reminder that the report that Philip referred to will be emailed out to you all after this session. But the last thing that remains for me to do is to thank all our panel members this afternoon and to ask you to show your appreciation for them in the usual way.
Good work.